I'm Brad Newcombe, and you're watching Pressure Point. It's never easy growing up, and the city provides particular challenges. For Aboriginal youth in Canada, there are particular issues that face them as well as all youth. And with me to talk about some of these issues is Rob Lind, who works with the Urban Native Youth Association and is the coordinator of the Aboriginal Safe House in Vancouver. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks.
Okay. You yourself grew up in the east side of Vancouver, Aboriginal, somewhat distant from your culture, you were telling me beforehand.
Yeah, it was quite a bit.
What was that like?
It was quite interesting. Like I said, I was born and raised in East Vancouver, so I never really knew too much about my culture and the background. I didn't know much about anything in the culture. So
When you think about that, you were growing up Aboriginal, First Nations, but there was no cultural framework? I mean, is that what...
Well, at the time, I didn't identify myself really as being Aboriginal. I wasn't really attending any potlatches or anything to do with Aboriginal culture. Most of the stuff I actually learned, I wound up learning through school because my mother got brought up more in a residential school setting, which means that she lost her language. Like, she wasn't allowed to speak her language. She wasn't allowed to practice her culture, in which case she couldn't really pass it on to me, which made it a little more complicated for me to understand the language and understand the culture or anything. It made it quite hard.
Now, how do you think that affected you? I mean, because at the same time you were watching movies, and I mean, you saw sort of Indians on TV. I mean,
well,
what did that do?
That's why I almost became, like, when I was in elementary and high school, I almost became like the Hollywood Indian, because I would just, go with what you see on TV and, make up a lot of stories along the way about your culture because you don't know anything about it. So you can make up basically anything. So mostly I'm more identified with the American culture as opposed to the Canadian culture, like the powwows and, like all the stuff you see on American TV and American Indians, Geronimo and stuff like that. I followed more with that than I did with actually my true culture, which is completely different.
And which nation are you with in Canada?
The Quagos Nation.
Okay, and that's based in?
Fort Rupert and Port Hardy.
Okay, great. Yeah, so that, I mean, I can understand. I mean, here you are in Vancouver, you're growing up, your mom wasn't able to pass on a culture, and you see all these American movies, which had pretty stereotypical images.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Of Native people, and not very positive.
No, not really.
Okay, what do you find now for, you work with Native youth in Vancouver. What are some of the sort of particular issues that face them?
Well, I think a lot more based like mine is the lack of culture, lack of cultural understanding. Even now we have, like, most of the time a youth from BC can go to a powwow night. We have a lot of powwows, we have a lot of family nights. They're more based around like Alberta and American powwows, whereas we don't have a lot as opposed to our own individual culture. And I mean, the one thing that's really important to me is that you have to have a really good understanding of your own culture, not just Aboriginal cultures in general, because there's so many different ones. So I like it when, like, if a kid comes into the safe house and wants to understand more about Aboriginal culture, I try to find out where that kid's from, and then we try to identify them with that particular culture, whether it be the potlatch system, Nisga'a, Quagos.
So now, how do you identify? Like, they will know where they come from, but I mean, obviously. But do you try to link them with somebody from that culture who's in the city?
Yeah, usually we can. Like, most of the time, a lot of them come from Alberta, Calgary, Winnipeg, areas like that. Whereas we have a lot of elders from that area, so we can usually link them up from an elder from that area, or we can link them up with some kind of a cultural teacher from that area. And there's a lot of them in Vancouver. And because I connect up with the Friendship Center, I'm also involved in the Vancouver Aboriginal Friendship Center. We have a lot of contacts there when it comes to culture and, just...
Like, you obviously understand the value for that, but I mean, we're talking youth, teenagers, and I know that when you mentioned the safe house, it was for ages 16 to 18. At that age, are they necessarily going to listen to you to say that? I mean, you may see that it's really helpful to get an elder, but is that something that people are open to?
Some kids not. I mean, with me, it doesn't matter what the kid needs. I'll try to find them what they need. And a lot of them can identify with an elder, and I think a lot of them do. Like, most of the kids that come to our house usually wind up speaking to an elder, or, it's a cultural teacher. We have cultural teachers that come in. And usually we try to identify them with the songs and a little bit about the background. And, we give them something to be proud of. We teach them about, some of the major accomplishments that Aboriginal people have made. And it's hard because I mean, we didn't really have letters back then. It was all passed through songs and passed through totems and passed through potlatches. So it was really hard to, it's really hard to identify with the culture unless you're actually spending time with an elder or spending time with somebody who's actually spent a lot of time working on it.
Just very much passed on through the telling of stories and through
Yeah.
the sharing of rituals and experiences and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we want to talk about generally about Native youth in the city, but also your work at something called the Aboriginal Safe House. Maybe there are different ways in which people are in the city. Some of them grow up in the city like yourself, and others come from the reserve to the city, you know, hoping to make it, go to school, look for a job, whatever.
Yeah.
What are the differences for Native youth who have grown up in the reserve or those who have grown up in the city?
I think the major difference is, you know, a lot of them come from a lot of, like, they have a lot more culture when they're coming into the city, and they understand more about the background, and when they come into the city, they come in more with curiosity, you know, and not really aware of what's happening in the city. You know, you have a lot of the same issues on reserve. I used to work on my reserve. One of my elders convinced me to go back to my reserve to work after I finished my first course of the Native Youth Workers Training Program. He convinced me to go back and learn about my culture and learn about everything up in my reserve. It made it a lot easier for me to identify with who I am, where I came from, and I find that's quite a different. They have a more better understanding of where they came from and what they're doing with themselves, and they have more understanding the four directions. You know, they can understand quite a bit of stuff that way. DeWhereas in the city, I think, like I said, I mean, I had a real lack of culture when I was growing up, so I didn't know who to identify myself with. You know, I kept on identifying myself with all different things. I mean, a lot of the situations are the same. I think there's a lot more family violence issues on reserve, you know, and there's a lot more acceptance to it. You know, sexual exploitation, family violence, drug and alcohol. It's a lot more accepted on reserve, whereas in the city it's not. Like, it would take a social worker almost a week to deal with a family violence situation on reserve, because they have to go through band council, they have to go through the band office, and then they have to go through the caregivers there. Whereas in the city, they could just bang, deal with it, apprehend the kids. You know, and it takes a lot more for you know, government social workers than that to do any kind of a job on the reserve as opposed to off the reserve, I think.
You yourself spent time on the street as a kid?
Yeah, I ran away when I was 13. So I lived in, like, we kind of had our own little set. I never really grew up with Aboriginal kids. I grew up running houses for runaways. You know, that's all we used to do is party and run all these wild houses. I got addicted to cocaine quite young in life. So I spent a long time with that, the addiction. And I got into dealing, you know, on Granville Street, just like most of the other street kids in Vancouver. So, yeah, I grew up quite intense.
How'd that turn around for you? I mean, obviously, you've now devoted your life to working with kids, youth themselves. How'd it turn around for you?
Well, to me, I got this one philosophy that everybody has a turning point. You know, like, and that's what I look for when I look for kids in a safe house, is that, like, my turning point was my son. I had a girlfriend that I had gotten pregnant. It was purely accidental, but, you know, I mean, that was my turning point in life. Like, I could have went this way, I could have went that way, but, you know, as soon as she told me that, you know, I'm going to have a child and I wanted to know what you wanted to do with it, I asked her what she wanted to do with it, and it was okay with me, whatever way she decided. And she said that she'd like to keep it. And I mean, I was dancing all over the place when she finally said she was going to keep it. And to me, I decided, do I want my son to see a drugged out drug dealer, or do I want my son to be proud of whoever I become? So that's why I decided that, you know, that was my turning point right then. I decided I was going to quit cocaine. I was going to quit everything else. I quit a little bit more differently than most. I didn't go to treatment centers. I didn't go to detoxes or anything like that. It was very much that turning point that changed my whole life around. You know, I went from quite the drug addict to a school junkie, and I went to every type of management program I could take, because I knew that I wanted to coordinate. I wanted to develop programs. So I took programs that were more based around conflict resolution, program development, working with youth. I knew that I wanted to work with youth, and to me, I kind of felt like I was the creator something, because I started really realizing I do have a spiritual side, and I never really had that before. So I kind of decided that it was like a debt to me. It's like for every gram that I sold a kid on the street, I felt like I had to pay back some way or another. And since we've opened the Safe House, I've worked with 300 youths.
How long, the Safe House now, who goes to Safe House? Aboriginal, how many are we talking about, and who goes there, and how do they end up in that situation?
Well, Safe House is available for everybody, every kind of...
So it's Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal?
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but 45% of the youth that come in are Aboriginal. I think it's more because of the name, but...
Well, yeah, Aboriginal Safe House, I mean, sort of sounds like it should be for Aboriginals.
Yeah, but no, it's open for all, and I mean, like I say, there's all kinds of different situations. I mean, most of them are kids coming in experimenting from reserves. A lot of the kids come from outside the city. That's the kids that wind up in the house. And they talk about 45% of the Aboriginal kids being street kids, but realistically, a lot of them won't come into a house because of the fact that, I mean, the difference between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal to me when you're a street kid is, as a street kid growing up, I found that I could go to anybody's house. Like, I mean, if you walk down the street and you see another Aboriginal kid, you always go, hi, how you doing? You never just close off to them. Whereas, when you're walking by non-Aboriginals, you don't usually say anything, and you notice that non-Aboriginals walk around, they don't really talk to each other as much, but they're very open. So if I went up to an Aboriginal kid I didn't know, he would grab me and he'd bring me to his mother's house, who would then bring me to her sister's house, and then, I'd always have a place to stay. I never lived on the street unless I chose to, which was a big difference between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, I found.
So there was a real bond, a real community.
Yeah, so I mean, that's one thing I like about, I love being Aboriginal because of the fact that I can go from community to community, and no matter what reserve I walk into, you're always going to get a smile, and you're always going to get a hello and who are you and how are you doing, whereas I don't see that as much in non-Aboriginal communities as I do.
So these kids who you end up working with in Safe House, I mean, are they sort of are they at the end of the rope, or I mean, are they just looking for a place to stay? I mean, what are some of the kind of sort of issues that they're dealing with? I mean, is it family violence or drug addiction or prostitution or what?
Yeah, well, when they come in, they eventually wind up dealing with prostitution. Sexual exploitation is very regular in Aboriginal communities. But when they first come in, like I say, it's more of an experimental thing. Like a kid comes in for a concert and decides he's going to live there, I think family violence is really important. I don't think I tend to believe that there's not a lot of people that really spend enough time with the kids and really working on what the kids' issues are. Like I said, my major number one concern is, family violence, how that kid's treated at home. It's like, I can fix that kid and work with that kid, but once we send them home, who's taking care of that kid when we get them home?
So what do you do? Do you sit down and talk with them, or how does that work?
Well, actually, it's not more me than it is my staff. I mean, I got an incredible staff. They run the program, they develop a rapport with the youth, and then they try to decide what the best action to take. And I mean, we focus more on what the youth needs, not what we think the youth need. So when the youth comes in, our first thing is to see what kind of goals they would like to accomplish while they're here. And technically, you only stay in our house for 7 days. So we got this old rule, it's called rack 'em, stack 'em, and pack 'em. We come them in and we try to process them, and we try to find a place for them to live, or we try to get them social services, we try to get them food. We just try to supply them their basic needs.
So can you give me an example of a goal? Say, what would be a goal that you would say an Aboriginal youth would have, and then you've got 7 days with this young man or woman? Is it? I'm taking it's co-ed, is it, or is it all male?
Yeah, it's co-ed. Yeah, I mean, the standard goal obviously is finding a place to live. That's the number one priority when the kids come in. Usually, is they're trying to look for a place to live. And like I say, my staff are very well trained, and we have housing workers in there that try to connect them up with some kind of house, or we try to connect them back up with their families. Whether it be Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. And there may be some reason why they don't want to go home. And sometimes that's really hard to explain to social services because, if the father once says, well, we'll accept that child home, but the child says, well, my father smacks me around a little bit and I don't really want to report it, but I don't want to go home, then that's where the tough job comes in, where the staff's actually trying to find this kid a place to live, or trying to accomplish something for their kid. And usually it's, like I say, most of it, they want some kind of a support, or they want to get out of their drug addiction. So a lot of times we're sending them to treatment centers, or they need a place to live. So we're trying to set them up either with another family member, or we're trying to get them own independent living, which tends to be a real problem because when a kid comes into our house and we try to find them a place to live, most of the time for the rent that welfare actually pays a kid is $325. I don't know what you'd think, but $325 isn't much. And there isn't much places these kids can get to live, so they wind up in...
There's virtually nowhere.
Yeah, they wind up in downtown hotel Skid Row, or they run in some kind of a slumlord in a room and board house, which really becomes a complication for us because they wind up coming back to the safe house because they go, they're trying to get out of a negative situation, so they get out of the negative situation, they come to the safe house. And the only thing we can find them is very low-income housing.
Send them back into a negative situation where you're going to be surrounded by the same issues that you were trying to get away from.
Yeah, so it's one real bad circle.
Yeah.
We're trying to develop more projects, independent living program for youth, semi-independent living programs for youth, where we actually have somebody actually trying to manage it and kind of keeping a close eye on the kid a little bit, but not holding their hands. It's like you let them live their life, you let them get the jobs, and then you go there at the end of the day, and or at the end of the day, see how they done. Have a meeting once a week to see if they have accomplished the goals they've been trying to do. It's another housing project we're trying to develop through our association. Which a lot of people, there's a lot of call for it now. At first, when we first started complaining about, these kids need better places to live. What's the use of us even doing this if we're just going to send them right back in a negative environment? But now people are starting to listen, and I'm starting to see a lot more press and a lot more talk about independent living for youth in general. And
that's for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal youth, yeah. But obviously there are some pretty serious issues. If you take a look at Canada's prison population, for instance, it has a much higher percentage of Native people in prison than reflected in the general population. Suicide rate for teenagers, Aboriginal teenagers, is higher than for non-Aboriginal. And I suppose, and I don't know about some of the others. Are those some of the things that
I think there's been a lot of
have to address?
Yeah, there's been a lot of cutbacks on support. I think the Aboriginal caregivers out in Vancouver are just incredible. And they kill themselves trying to work as many people as possible. And that's just the point. You go through a burnout stage. And to me, it's really particular. I'm really picky about my team and how they develop. I want them to still care, not come in and the fact that this is just a job, get my 9 to 5 and go home, no big deal. I like having people that come in and really care about what these kids are doing. And my staff sometimes are a little over caring, including me, to a point where you're trying to find out where this kid is. We had a girl that we've been kind of working with that's been going back and forth to the street. Whereas the staff, she's really playing on their heartstrings. So you got the whole staff phoning around and driving around at nighttime to go downtown and look for her. And, like I say, it plays on their heartstrings quite a bit.
How do you draw, getting away from it, how do you draw the line? There's somebody who's obviously hurting, is vulnerable, you want to protect. At the same time, you could easily burn yourself out, your staff could get burnt out. At the same time, somebody can sort of play your heartstrings and just keep on getting you more and more and more. How do you know where to draw the line? The kind of tough love sort of thing.
You have to be able to not be afraid to share your powers. That's my concept of it. It's like, I know what job I have to do, and I know the people I can connect this kid up with. So I don't have much of a problem with it. It's a matter of, in my safe house, I got 3 or 4 different people working with one kid, and every once in a while that kid's going to steal a heartstring or two in a program, but at the same time with the staff, I have to let them know that they have to be able to trust the outside agencies. And downtown East Side has some of the best resources for kids, and my staff has to trust that and let them go sometimes. And sometimes it's hard, they get sent to a house and you want to make sure a kid's getting just the right amount of care you wanted to give them. And I'm a foster parent too, so I've even had kids from a safe house come to my house, stay at my house. I think ever since I've been a youth worker, I've had close to 20 kids living with me on occasion.
At various times, yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to one person, and it's very true. Whereas Aboriginal communities, they'll go to the people that need the help instead of waiting for the people who need the help to come to them. And I find that a lot. I'll drive a lot downtown. A lot of my shift I'll cover just driving downtown, just looking for kids and trying to strike up conversations with kids and hanging out with them.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because I know that I mean, in the downtown east side, I mean, it's not a huge area, and I know that in every community, there's people know each other. So, I mean, people that hang out, street kids will know other street kids. You know, prostitutes, they know other prostitutes. The police sort of have an idea of who's around there. Are you in that group too, and do you know a lot of those characters and personalities and individuals and stuff like that?
Yeah, some of the best way to find kids is through the kids that come to the house. It's like if I'm missing a kid and 2 weeks later another kid comes in and you start talking to them and having a cigarette with them, and then all of a sudden they're talking about this other kid that they ran down that you've been looking for like a month, you know, so you get a general idea of where that kid is, and then you call the outreach teams and send them down to talk to them. You know, like I say, you trust a lot more in the downtown organizations, you know, like, you know, we have DEAS down there, and, you know, the Needle Exchange Program, and YAC, which is Youth Action Coalition, and, you know, they got really good people there.
Do you use a lot of peer groups? I mean, do some of the kids that have end up having going through the Aboriginal Safe House, do they end up coming back and doing volunteer work, or is it pretty much, does that ever happen?
Yeah, we tend to take, kids come back quite a bit.
Do they?
I mean, our staff come back after shift. I mean, it's...
Oh, really?
Yeah,
wow.
Our staff will leave and then they'll come back 2 hours later because they want to have dinner with the kids, or, you know, talk to that kid. You know, if they hear a kid's in town and just happens to be coming by that staff hasn't seen, that staff will come by. But yeah, kids come back quite frequently, and I mean, we've had quite a few kids that are a lot interested in our program. And actually, I mean, with Urban Native Youth Association, we're very particular about that. We want the youth, you know, it's like one of our staff members says, youth programs should be youth driven. You know, too many programs for youth are based more on assumption. And we try to get a lot of input from youth before we develop the program. The Safe House concept was developed by Family Services, who utilized a group of youth to actually develop the program. Like what they did is they had them through the whole development process. You know, what they need, what kind of things they think they need, what kind of things they'd like to do. You know, and that's the thing that fascinated me most about the whole program. When I walked into it, there was already a Safe House running that I got to model after, which made it a lot easier for me because, like I said, it was developed by youth, so it made it a lot easier. So in the year that we've been open, I've been trying really hard to get as much information from the youth, like how did this program work for you and what kind of things do you think could be added to the program that would make it better? And they came up with great ideas, like they wanted people to help them get resumes, employment programs, you know, they need housing workers, you know, and they wanted to do their own cooking sometimes, you know, and some kids wanted to learn more about culture, and some kids wanted counselors to come in, and, you know, we developed that into a program. So the program's always changing constantly. You know, we're always trying to develop new things into the program. And like I said, my staff are really good. They're always coming in with new proposals and new ideas, more based on what they feel kids need, because, you know, kids talk to them on a regular basis.
Well, that's what sounds so good about it. I mean, it's not based on assumption. It's based on listening to where the youth are, and then trying to sort of meet that on some level.
I mean, I think every program we've run through our organization, we've always made it a point to get youth input. We have, on our board of directors, 4 of our board of directors are youth, and we're very particular about that. You know, and I mean, it's made all our programs very successful, you know, just because we've been able to get that input. You know, I think a lot more focus should be placed on recreation and, you know, like pre-medicine, I don't know how you would say it, like things that they should, like stuff to avoid them from getting into the drug scenes and stuff like that.
The drug scene is the drug scene a big issue?
Yeah, peer pressure, drug scenes, you know, kids experiment in different types of drugs. Crystal meth is like the new drug to me. I mean, when I was doing coke, I didn't even hear crystal meth. You know, now crystal meth is this new thing that's come in. And, you know, there's a lot of different drugs coming in the street. You know, crack you know, itself has been, it has never been that much of a drug. It was always freebase when I was younger, but now it's turned into a crack, which is a lot more stronger and more addictive.
Heroin too?
Yeah, heroin's pretty regular with a lot of the kids, but I think mostly it's the crystal meth, it's the uppers. You know, there are a few kids that come in.
And then, of course, there's the issues around HIV, AIDS, prostitution, as you mentioned, sexual exploitation. I mean, just all kinds of sort of traps for kids on the street, aren't there?
Oh, yeah. HIV is a very big one. You know, I mean, it's become bigger and bigger, and there's not enough education for them. I mean, we have a few Healing Our Spirits. There's quite a few AIDS groups now that are going out in the street and working with kids. I had a really good staff member. He's from Healing Our Spirits, who was actually doing outreach for me, and he's trying to educate kids on AIDS and going and doing workshops in schools. And our program, we go to different schools, and we'll do different workshops on issues concerning kids, and we'll do icebreakers and games just to get to know them, give out business cards, and sometimes.
So you do this in the Vancouver schools, in
Yeah.
the high schools?
Yeah.
And obviously then this brings together Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, and of course non-Aboriginal covers, probably 40, 50 different language groups, and how many cultures?
32, I think.
30, really?
Yeah.
So in other words, you're really bringing together a lot of people.
Yeah.
It sounds incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Must be really rewarding.
Oh, it is. Yeah, with me, my staff, I think more than me. Like I said, to me, it's like I'm like the feet of the program, and my staff are the hands and eyes and nose and ears. Like they do all the work, and I just get them to where they're going when they need to.
So in other words, and then of course then the youth also bring in the input, the ideas.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm too emotional to really work too much with youth. It's like if I spend more than an hour with one youth, and that's it, I'm emotionally attached, and I got to work with that kid, and I'm not going to quit until that kid's done with it. My staff, they run into a lot of the same situations. I'm always arguing with staff because they want to keep the kid longer and they want to help them out.
It's just terrific work, and just thanks so much for sharing it with me.
Yeah, no
And
problem.
with all of us, thanks.
Thanks a lot.
I've been talking with Rob Lind, and he works with the Urban Native Youth Association and is the coordinator of the Aboriginal Safe House in Vancouver. Thanks for joining us on Pressure Point. I'm Brad Newcombe.